Hi, welcome to Leaving Crazy Town with Finn and Sarah. What do we got going on today, Sarah?
Hi there. Well, today we have a special surprise, and it's really a gift to have Mary Beth O'Connor here. And she has written the book From Junkie to Judge. And oh God, I'm going to start crying already. I just finished it 2 nights ago. And for anybody that needs any motivation, and feels like your life was just too hard and I can't do it and I can't do sobriety, believe me, read this book because it gives you hope. It gives you courage to know someone else went through what you went through and was able to get sober and find your way. So it was a miracle. And at times it was hard to read just because of the amount of trauma you experienced. And what a story, Mary Beth. So, I guess my first question was going to be, geez, can you tell us a little bit just about your journey of from being a meth addict to how you kind of first started dabbling with sobriety and recovery?
Yeah, and so the subtitle sort of captures part of the arc, right? Which is one woman's triumph over trauma and addiction. And as you say, it's not that is a too common story.
Yes.
And so many of us, when we enter substance recovery, we also have a trauma recovery, or other mental health conditions. I had PTSD and I didn't know it, and it showed up as very severe anxiety. So it's very common that you sort of have to work on a more holistic approach than just getting sober. But for me, yeah, I mean, I started with alcohol when I was 12, a result of child abuse in the home, physical, sexual, verbal, some outside sexual assaults. And by 17, I was shooting meth. And I went to college. I left my Central Jersey to go to Berkeley, and I did better for a couple of years. But I had another sexual assault and a violent boyfriend. And I sort of like lost the little bit of grip that I had. And from when I graduated college until 32, I was using meth almost every day. So it was a real downhill slide. It was a 32, I was, feeling very trapped, very hopeless. My partner was ready to throw me out, and I couldn't hold a job, and I was having physical problems. And so altogether, it's sort of, which is, I think, more the sort of gradual wearing down approach to entering recovery is more common than that epiphany they you see on television, right? Epiphanies happen, like a DUI might be an epiphany, but
Right.
often it's that you're just worn down, you just are exhausted and can't move. And so that's when I entered sobriety when I was 32. And I went to rehab, inpatient, which not everybody needs, but if you're on the more severe end like I was, it's often a good idea if you can get access, which can be a challenge.
Yeah.
And I ended up building sort of an individual plan. I didn't follow any one program. I attended different peer support, 12 steps, which is all the anonymouses. I attended Women for Sobriety, the Parent for Rational Recovery, the Parent for Lifering, and I sort of synthesized them into what today we would call a personal recovery plan.
Right.
And that's really, it was really about that sort of incremental approach, patience and persistence. I was not perfect in sobriety from day one. I used 3 times in my first 5 months. Perfect abstinence happens. It's not the norm. There's a lot of emotions that are coming up that you don't know how to deal with that can push you back. Plus, your brain is screaming at you like, you need that drug.
I
You
can
need that
relate to that.
drug. But I did just have 31 years of continuous sobriety. And also I did a lot of work on my trauma and PTSD as well.
Right.
Wow.
Right. I mean, Finn, when I first heard Finn's story and I read your book, you two literally, what amazes me is same thing in this, like going to college, going to law school, all this stuff while you're using. I mean, the two of you, I think I was barely functioning. I could not do college when I was used. So that always just amazes me that people can do that. Like you guys, I just, certain brains that is not mine that kind of can get through all that.
I
But
I look at some of my achievement stuff while I was using as another addiction.
mm,
I I'm also a victim of trauma, sexual abuse. And, while you were talking, I was wondering, you hear a lot of people say, I mean, it's obviously never the victim's fault, but I had the recurring stuff as well in the home and then outside the home. And I'm like, did I have a beacon on my head that said, this person's, viable to abuse,
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, so it's really neat to be able to chat with somebody who's also overcome stuff and has such a great outlook on recovery, because for me, a lot of times I hear, oh, well, my life was like this, so I can't,
Mm.
the people who can't go past it. And, I feel for them, but it's also very frustrating when I'm like, you can.
Right. Right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the reality is most people do recover. I mean, substance use disorder, the modern name for addiction, is a treatable medical condition from which about 75% of the people will eventually recover. But the other reality is that we don't really offer everyone the supports that they might need. We talk as if we have treatment on demand. We talk as if we're going to help people, but we really don't do a good job of it. A lot of people can't access treatment if they don't have insurance or cash. If they can, it's not always evidence-based. It's often not long enough.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of problems with the system that makes it harder for people to get well. And when I look at people who are stuck, first of all, they have my sympathy, my empathy. It's a miserable existence. But I also feel like we sometimes judge them as if they've been offered all the opportunities on earth to get
Right.
well, and that's just not the way it is for many people.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was one of my questions because I think it says something about your ego strength when you describe you went to NA, I think, for a little while, you were in treatment, and then those messages sometimes from a 12-step program, and we both do 12 steps and have done other things. But it's like that there are these kind of unwritten rules or these things that people make up, like about how it's supposed to be. Like, oh, if you don't go to meetings, you'll relapse, or whatever the saying is. And I just thought it was so powerful when you talked about, hey, I realized this wasn't working. And I think you said you didn't believe in a God at that time or, wanted a different approach, but you took the time to look in all these different avenues. And can you tell us what about She Recovers or the other program you did or some of the other things that really called to you? And I'll share an experience after that that kind of filled in the things that were not working in the other programs.
Yeah, I mean, I support 12 steps when it's a good fit, but
Yep.
you're right. First of all, it wasn't just the higher power thing for me with 12 steps. It was that I wasn't going to turn my will and my life over. I really didn't like to focus on defects. That powerless idea I wasn't comfortable with. But they told me at first that's all there was. So I read the AA big book, I read the NA text, I went to meetings, I was pulling ideas, but then when I got home, I found other groups that were a better fit. And part of the reason they were a better fit is that they are more, they tend to be more self-empowerment focused. And that's really what I had done without knowing it, is I had taken control of my recovery. I was, even when I didn't know about the other groups, I was really filtering 12 steps for which of these sort of ideas, I didn't even view them as suggestions, but which of these ideas do I think might work for me? And I was modifying them and, reframing them. But I was still really uncomfortable because everyone was telling me I was doing it wrong. You
Right.
have to do it this other way or you're going to fail. Well,
Right.
it turns out that's not true. And we should never lie to people about what the recovery options are.
Yes.
But I do think we often go too far. Like, I think there is value in us sharing our stories and what worked for us. But we need to do it in a way without ego in it. We need to do it
Yes.
as in, here's an example for your consideration. Not like you have to do it my way, because
Right.
my way worked for me and therefore it'll work for you and therefore it works for everybody. Those two extra
Yes.
steps are where people go wrong, right? But it worked for me, and I'm going to give you some ideas. That's very useful to the newcomer.
Yes.
And I think we should encourage that. We just have to take a step back and know that my way isn't right for everybody.
Yes.
And so, like She Recovers, you mentioned, She Recovers is not just, it's about building up your best self, about connecting to your authentic self, but also She Recovers isn't just for substance recovery.
Mm.
It's also for trauma and mental health and
Mhm.
perfectionism, which is often a trauma response, and overeating or, video game addiction or whatever it might be. It's everything together because most of the women in substance recovery have one or more of those other things to recover from as well.
Yeah.
And in She Recovers, you can talk about the sort of the interplay. Like there's an interplay in why these problems develop, but there's an interplay in the recovery too. And
Yes.
so in She Recovers, you might say like, I'm doing really well with my alcohol, but I'm now struggling more with my food or with my PTSD. And you can talk about the interplay. And that's unusual. That's the only group that I know of that really has that sort of structure.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really, really important. I know I've been in 12-step meetings where somebody will bring up a different type of addiction than what that meeting is for, and people will tell them to leave. And I'm like, we're not trying to get people killed here. And I
Right.
also believed,
Right.
I really struggled with the higher power piece. And I know you're saying that's not exactly, you were creating something that worked for yourself, but a lot of the rigid stuff early on in my 12-step program and the higher power, there was no way that I was turning my higher power into God. And I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And I was just blessed with a sponsor who said to me, and then I spoke to, for 3 days, I was like, I'm going to die because I can't make
Mm,
this. And people were telling me, open your heart and let Jesus in and this and that. And luckily there was always people saying like the opposite. But my sponsor said to me, like, why are you trying to turn your higher power into God? And I'm like, I thought that's what I was supposed to do, And it's like, so I literally used a spoon and, it was like a flying spoon and I drew pictures of it and I'd put like little fin in it when I had to do difficult. I mean, I pretty much made up a lot of stuff myself, but
right.
that whole idea, and then also you hear people say you have to do service, I couldn't even function.
Right.
Like I was the person who, when I used, I got exceeds at work. And when I stopped using, my boss asked me what the hell was wrong with me because I couldn't function. I was like locked up in my house and I'm supposed to be helping everyone, you
Right.
know.
Right.
I couldn't
Right.
even deal.
Right.
Well, you're right. Even things like 90 meetings in 90 days, that can be a good idea for people who are capable of it. You've got a single mother who's
Right.
working, and that's not always an option. And
That's
so
right.
all of these things have to be as here's some strategies that may or may not work for you as
Yes.
an
Right.
individual. Now, and
It's
the other
all the
thing,
go ahead.
no, 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 good, no, please.
No, it's all the presentation. And I do think sometimes, and Finn and I do talk about this, when anything is coming from fear, it seems like, and that's why I talk so much about codependency, because I think there's so many people in the halls of different groups that have the underlying codependency or trauma or history that's impacting them. And the desire to control or be rigid is the way they're coping, but it's affecting how they're interacting with people and what they're telling people to do. So there's no spaciousness or okayness with, hey, do this or do that, because it feels threatening to their own recovery. And I remember, I don't know if you've ever heard of Charlotte Castle. When I first got sober, I got sober in 84. She had written this Many Roads, One Journey, and she wrote a book about 16 steps for women. And I remember reading those steps and thinking, oh, it felt so like sacrilegious because I had been in AA and it's like, oh my God. But I started a women, this Charlotte Castle group with this book. And it was just a whole different view. It was based on, that women don't have an ego and we need to build an ego. We don't need to get rid of our ego. And we have different ways we developed that were, and she loves the 12 steps, but she was like adding to. She wrote another book, Women, Sex and Addiction, which was brilliant. But just that whole idea that, certain things women may feel more comfortable being in groups of women and talking about or dealing with issues that are specifically to them. So, I mean, it's fine to do whatever you want that's going
Yes.
to enrich your recovery. But to have certain people that are telling you, especially when you're new, oh, you can't do this, that's going to be really disheartening and,
It's and it's
discouraging.
dangerous. And it's dangerous because
Yeah.
you're putting the person in front of you's recovery at risk. When they told me at my rehab that I had to do it the 12-step way, and I knew that wasn't a good fit, and I told them multiple, if I would have believed them, I might have given up because I felt like, well, I can't do that. And so luckily I stood back and said, you know what? I'm just gonna take the parts that I think are useful and just ignore the rest of it, you know.
Right.
But it still created a lot of fear and anxiety in me
Yes.
because they were telling me I was wrong. They
Yeah.
told me over and over that I was wrong. And I think we need to look at what's our goal should only be what's going to help the newcomer standing in front
Yes.
of me. And it can't
Yeah.
be about my ego or I need you to listen to me and
Yes.
follow me. Exactly. That you shouldn't be sponsoring people if that's your attitude. You
Right.
shouldn't really even be advising people because it's not helpful. It's putting your needs above theirs and their
Yes.
needs should come first.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the whole premise that, oh, we don't know what's good for ourselves, but yet those same people will tell someone else what they must do. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right. And
Yes.
and the idea too of substitution. I mean, I love the idea of, one place that deals with all the underlying issues because it's so common to go into a meeting and see everybody has food issues or everybody's acting out with some affair or, I mean, that stuff happens all the time. And I see it always as, underlying causes and conditions, right?
Yes.
The deeper and deeper cuts of what's there. And so it's kind of a cool idea to be able to talk about all these different things in one place. I like that idea.
Well, I mean, and that's why, like, sometimes I get asked, you know, do people just substitute one addiction for another? And my answer to that is if they haven't dealt with the reason that
Right.
substances, excessive substances was attractive or was meeting a need, then they are much more likely to start doing something else, you know, some other behavior in an unhealthy way. I
Right.
mean, the reality is that's why we distinguish between sobriety and recovery, right? I
Mhm.
mean, to have recovery, you have to, recovery includes what was the reason that was pushing me into this behavior that kept me stuck in this behavior, you know, what was underneath it, because usually it's underneath it. It's like we know that most people use all drugs in moderation. That 10 to 20% of us that can't do that, there's usually something else going on that needs to be addressed when we get sober.
Right. Absolutely. Did you want to say something?
Nope.
Okay. One question I had also was because there was so much like physical violence, trauma, I mean, for an extended period of time, I think to myself, even with our own recovery, stuff can get activated in the present. And I was thinking, how have you kind of not necessarily healed, but manage or work with all that history that still can come up and get in the way of whatever, a relationship or, remembering an event or having some PTSD? Like, how do you ongoingly cope with that stuff?
I mean, so when I got sober, and I got home from rehab, I knew that the violence history was underneath my drug use, right? And so I did look for a therapist when I got home with expertise in trauma, and she had a little bit of addiction expertise. And so she, to my surprise, but correctly diagnosed me with PTSD. Today we would call it complex PTSD. And for me, my biggest symptom was very severe anxiety. And
Mm,
so I always had this belief, deep-seated belief, because of how I grew up, that no matter how good things were today, you know, any second now, one little mistake that I make or no mistake, and my whole world's going to blow up in my face. I'm going to lose everything that I have. And so my anxiety was very severe. My husband used to call me the "what about tomorrow" girl, you know, because I couldn't trust it. And that recovery took many years longer than my substance recovery. I was in individual therapy for 3 years. And then I went into a group of women with trauma histories for 6 more years. And at the end of that, I would say I was 80% recovered. And today I consider myself like 90 to 95% recovered. So it doesn't happen as much. And for me, it was the anxiety was the spinning and the spinning and the rethinking and the just, you know, any little mistake or fear could, you know, trigger me to get aggressive and just lived in fear and anxiety. And now today, after all that work, it happens occasionally, but not nearly at the same level of intensity, and it doesn't last. I'm able to, shake it off at most usually in a day, not even usually that long. Whereas before it could be literally like weeks where I couldn't shake myself out of it. So, and I don't want to scare anybody about the length of that hard work. It's not like it's terrible and a light switch at the end.
No,
It's
no,
incrementally better, right?
right.
Incrementally better. But that was the harder recovery. It's more complicated. The trauma history came first, and it's more complicated and it has more nuances. And so it was definitely a long process from which I have, as I mostly recovered.
I when I whenever I tried to stop using drugs or alcohol, I would end up trying to commit suicide and end up in a mental institution. And when I first got sober, and I was, like I said, kind of locked up because I was just locked down in my house. I couldn't go to work because I didn't know how to function without something in my system. But I had gone to mental institutions because I would try to kill myself. And I thought, oh, I'm not as bad as these people because I didn't go to rehab. But then it dawned on me, obviously, after I stayed clean for a while, that I wasn't healthy enough to go to rehab. I had to go get tied to a bed. And what I got diagnosed with early on was bipolar disorder with psychotic episodes. And I got drugged
Mm,
like there was no tomorrow.
mm,
And after a period of time, I identified as mentally ill, and that was like became my whole life. And I finally said to my doctor, like, I don't like being on these meds because my whole personality was gone. I was just, and they were giving me enough medication that they said could tranquilize a horse, and I
mhm,
was still wound up, and ultimately, my therapist said, we'll talk with your doctor about weaning you off the medication. Would you be willing to do psych testing first? And it came out I had extreme PTSD from all my abuse
right.
and my trauma. And, so I got off the medication and started to deal with that stuff. But it was just another whole, like not dealing with the situation. And, so I can relate to that incremental healing.
Mm,
And at times there's like a bigger push
mm,
to go through stuff, and then you relax a little on it, and then you're ready to go in a little bit deeper. And today I get triggered. Not I'm probably not like 98% healed, but 80. But I also recognize, oh, this is what's coming up. I'm not
Yeah.
reacting to it like I
mm.
was, and I remind myself that's not where I'm at today. I'm fine.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the other thing when you guys are sharing about this, the anxiety stuff, I just literally did a recording with a woman who has a YouTube channel called Therapy in a Nutshell, and it's all about anxiety and PTSD and depression. She's a therapist. And I talked about the connection between anger and anxiety. And that I thought about this a lot when I was reading your book, because I know you were talking about the perfectionism and the hyper focus and obsessively thinking and ruminating and the perfectionism. And I thought, I think sometimes the obsessive thinking is a response to the feelings of anger or rage that can't be expressed. And I think when I was reading your book, I'm like, where did all that go? Or did you transform it or displace it? Or, how do you ever feel that now? Because there was so much that I even felt while reading your book about the rage when you had the helplessness and the powerlessness.
Yeah, there's this thing about, I actually wrote a piece I'm going to try to get placed, opinion piece about, I actually, the thing about you have to forgive, your abusers, I
Right.
don't actually agree with that. I don't think you have to forgive, but I do think you have to release the anger or the rage for
Right.
your own mental health benefit, for your
Yes.
own life enjoyment benefit. And so it took me a long time. I was more angry at my stepfather. It took me a long time to understand my mother's role and
Right.
to process those feelings because of the two, she was the better one, right? And plus, she was around, longer. And so it was a gradual processing it in therapy, starting to be able to release it. And you're right. I mean, with her, let's say she could trigger me and then I would get aggressive. I would behave like she taught me to behave.
Yes.
I would yell, I would jump down her throat, I would be mean, and in reaction to her. And I
Yeah.
had to gradually learn how to sort of release that emotion so that I could interact with her in a calm way. And I remember when one time she was screaming at me about something, calling me a junkie whore. I mean, this was like, I don't know, 10 years in a recovery or something.
Right.
And I realized I'm not just acting calm, I feel calm. Like
Right.
what she's saying is not impacting me anymore. I don't care what she says.
Yeah.
She's not someone who I care what their opinion is. And so that was proof to me that I had actually been able to resolve the anger, the rage, the frustration that was based on her role in what happened. Um,
Right.
I
it was a
complete
beautiful place to be. It was
Yeah.
like place to be because then I could deal with her in a civil way that when I had to deal with her, but I didn't get sucked into the chaos.
Yes.
Mary Beth, I was trying to explain something similar to a buddy of mine because he's so triggered by his family and his abuse. And I would say like the forgiveness piece, like you're saying, is almost becomes irrelevant when they don't matter. Like the people that affected me and that I, had all my PTSD from, to me, like I don't wish them ill, but literally they have no power
Mm.
over me today. It's so weird to get to that. It's like this weird place of neutrality where you're like, they're irrelevant.
Mm.
Like, it
Mm.
is so odd that, family members will say stuff to me today. And I'm like, I don't care.
Right.
Like they don't realize, they think they still have this thing and, like they're still living where we were and I'm gone. Like I'm not there.
Right. Right.
But,
Right.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. Right. And hopefully our conversation about this is helping others who are still struggling with it have hope. I mean, it's a gradual process. It was a
Yeah.
gradual process to get there, but it is a wonderful place to be able to live.
Yeah, and I mean, I even heard that when, in the early days of my, education and journey and sobriety, that when you get sober, oftentimes if you have undiagnosed PTSD, it gets worse because suddenly you're not even aware of what's happening. And so it sometimes can get worse before it gets better when you put down the substances that are kind of holding you together
well, you
in
have
a
to
way.
Yes,
feel it.
yes.
You have to
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
feel it.
right. It's because the emotion, you can feel it. I mean,
that's right.
the pain is the reason substances work, what they work
Right.
at is keeping you more numb, right? Keeping the pain at
Yes.
bay. That's what I mean. I always emphasize it. They worked in the beginning. Meth worked in the beginning, and that's what it worked for. Was one of the two purposes to keep the feelings at bay. You take the chemicals away, the suppression chemicals away, and now they're coming up, and you feel them more. I mean, and I always, it's interesting to me, Finn, that you say that you had these psychotic episodes because I was stuck in my addiction for a long time because I believed that if I stopped using, I would either commit
Mm.
suicide or have a psychotic break and end up institutionalized. I thought those were my three choices, and
Right.
that drugs was the lesser evil.
Yeah.
It didn't happen that way, but that's what I really believed because my pain was so vast, and I knew the drugs were a pain management tool.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I
Yes.
would inflict pain on myself because it was relieving the pain the emotional pain that I had. And, I hear a lot of people talk about cutting and
I
people
did.
attention seeking, but for me, it was like trying to relieve some pain. And what I was going to say earlier, like, I don't know if you experienced this, but when I got sober, I cried a lot. I didn't before that. Like, I never would cry, but because I was afraid that like to feel that emotional pain that I would die. It really felt like death was imminent. And I'll never forget the first time I like had a complete break, crying my eyes out on the floor, like, and then I got up and I was like, I didn't die. Like I
Right.
was so surprised by it, that I just experienced it. And that's how I started relieving a lot of the stuff was just letting it come out.
Yes. Yes.
That reminds me. I remember therapists used to tell me, we won't bring you along more than you can handle. And I thought, how do you know what I can handle? Like my trust level was very, very low,
No, I did
Absolutely.
not. Yeah, no. And most of I remember, I don't know if you've heard of internal family
Yeah,
systems.
yeah.
Well, my therapist says to me, he's like, there's a great book, if you want to I I'd love to go through it with you, whatever. And I'm like, okay. So he tells me the name of the book and he went on vacation for a few weeks. I bought the book, read the entire thing, practiced. I did all the internal. I made up my own way to do the process of bringing these people out of the dark room and healing and giving them new jobs. And, so I basically rewrote the whole in 2 weeks, did the whole thing, like came up with, and I actually have a whole coloring book of my own. It's not like an actual published book that I drew all the like different parts of myself that were coming together. But that's how much I trusted. I
Right.
was like, I'll do it myself, but thank you for the information.
Right. Right. Right.
I did that in my first year of sobriety, I think it was. So
Yeah, and that balance, that's such a great topic. The balance between empowering yourself and knowing what you need to take care of yourself and the choices to make, what programs to do, what do I think I need, and where is it that I really need to reach out for help and work on trusting people and receiving help. I mean, it's tough when you have such broken relationships in the history and betrayals and violence and all that stuff like both of you have had. How do you start trusting and gaining, connections with people, which is such an important part in recovery?
Well, I will say that I do always tell newbies that asking for help is a self-empowerment decision, right? Because
And
you're sort of doing the analysis, you're deciding this is what I need, and you're going out and getting it. That's
yes,
self-empowerment.
yes,
But yeah, trusting the process is a little different. It reminds me when I interviewed the therapist that I ended up with, she seemed very hippy dippy to me, like very sort of new agey, I thought, I don't know, I'm not sure this is going to work, but it turned out that it was still very helpful to me. In part, she was just very sort of quietly calm about what she was saying. She was just she didn't remind me of people that I had problems with because she
right,
was a very different personality, and I think part of that helped. I wasn't like triggered by her tone of voice or body language or any of that. But over time, I started, even I say I trusted her. I trusted her enough to listen closely to her, but I would fight back sometimes, about what I remember. She told me that she said, Mary Beth, you're really smart. You can find a logical reason for anything that you're thinking. It doesn't mean that it's true,
right.
and I would tell her like, well, I'm not saying this bad outcome that this catastrophe that I'm worried about, right? I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying it could happen.
and we need a plan.
And I need a plan, and I need a very detailed plan, and I need to be ready. And so
Oh,
it was a process to gradually, start to see things more her way than the way I was naturally inclined to see them.
well, I remember when the Twin Towers, fell and people were so shocked. And that wasn't I was like, yeah, well, stuff happens. Because of my own trauma, I didn't respond to that in like a state of emergency. To me, it was like, yes, this is why, these are the things that bad things happen,
Mm,
and
mm,
that whole idea that I could prepare for the worst case scenario in any scenario in my life was how I lived. Like, okay, well, yes, this is the hope, but let's be realistic and let's have a plan.
right, right,
That's
It's
true.
very draining though to have to
I
constantly have a
still
plan.
right.
I still do it to a degree. It's like I like when I retired. I mean, we're doing the math on money. That's
Right.
complicated. No, first of all, it would be so much easier to do the math if you knew how long you were going to live. Okay, but
Exactly.
and so
Good point.
this is a natural area of fear for me where there's, many factors not within my control, a lot of unknown variables, and yet I have to make a decision, right? So that's like a weak point for me. And so, but part of it was thinking, well, what if this? Okay, what if that? What if my husband dies tomorrow? What if we lose
Right.
the house? Like just trying to reassure myself that under pretty much any scenario I can think of, I'll have food. Okay, like but it's still a lot better because I'm not obsessing about it daily. If there's some kind of an economic change or whatever, I might think about it for a couple of days or I'll look at the math again. And I do track my assets and my income and my expenses every month to sort of stay on top. But I'm not obsessing in the way I was. But I still do like that even if the worst case scenario happens, knowing that I'm
Yeah.
going to be able to handle it. And I'll say that was the trick in recovery. I had to learn that bad things will happen,
Yeah.
right? But you have to understand, what you have to trust is that you can handle it.
Yes.
Right.
Not necessarily you're going to handle it without pain or without challenge or difficulty, but you can handle it. And ultimately, that's the only thing that you can trust.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I definitely track my expenses as well. And I think what you're saying and how I feel about it too is I always do think things through, but I don't perseverate about them happening.
Yes.
Right.
Like, okay, I'll be okay. And I do as well have that belief that no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. I am fighting the urge to look at my 401k right now, but I haven't done it because I'm like, I'm not retired. And I'm like, long term, don't worry about it today, because my instinct is like, get all my money and put it in the backyard.
I mean, I think there's something great about preparation, obviously, and wanting predictability and wanting to feel safe. And it's where it's kind of, where does it border? I need to know an outcome or I'm trying to control the future. I mean, so it's just like, what can we do today to
Right.
help make us feel better? And then what do we need to let go of? So, I mean, that is part of the balance, right? So I know we're going to run out of time, but what's your recovery look like today? We were talking about what brings you joy. Are you involved in other things? Where can people find you? What are you interested in now, etc.?
That was only 5 questions in one, but you got it.
Well, so
Hey, Bubble Mary Beth.
one of the nice things, so I went to law school at 6.5 years sober. So I had tried when I was using, that didn't work. And I went
Yes,
for real. And then I was a lawyer, and then I was appointed a federal administrative law judge when I had 20 years sober. And I
got it.
took early retirement 5 years ago. And that really allowed me a chance to think about, like, what do I want to do with my time? And it
Yes,
opened up a couple things. One is I'm retired and I can talk openly about my whole history in a way that
right.
I really couldn't when I was working. And so it offered new opportunities. But it
Yes,
also was a chance to say, what do I like doing? Well, I like writing. I like, talking. I like educating. I like working with
yes.
others, or, being of use. And so today my life is around my sort of recovery work. And so I have my memoir out, as you mentioned,
Yep.
From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, available on Amazon and all the usual sites and
There you go.
bookstores. Have it or can get it. I'm on the board for Life Rings Secular Recovery. I'm on the board for She Recovers Foundation. I'm on the advisory council for the Higher Calling Foundation. I've had opinion pieces like in the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times and Recovery Today. And those are on my website, which is
Nice.
junkietoJudge.com. I do a lot of workshops and conferences. I have presentations sort of tailored for different audiences. And of course, can customize. I train lawyers and judges. I do a continuing legal education substance, use disorder, CLE. And I do, some radio and television podcasts and others. And so it's really about trying to find a good balance of what I like to do, but also where can I be of use. And so,
Yeah.
like my social media, which for X, it's at Mary Beth O _. For Blue Sky, it's Mary Beth O'Connor, and I'm on LinkedIn. I really keep my social media feeds totally on topic, either about substance use, recovery, trauma, mental health. I don't veer out of that. And I try to make it be educational. So I'll post the new studies that come up, the new
Got it.
articles from different experts in the field, my recovery thoughts. I just try to sort of try to share information that I think will be helpful. And I will say that judge title, what I use that for today is an ear opener. Former federal judge,
Yes.
31 years sober, on these boards, has this book. It's a way to help people listen, I think, a little harder, so that they might absorb some of the information I think it's important for them to know.
Right. I mean, addiction does not care what your job is or what
No.
race you are or how old you are. It
But
doesn't
if it makes
matter.
somebody's ears open up, like I
Yes.
always say, well, the doctor, because Sarah's obviously a doctor, and but my being a tax attorney is somewhat irrelevant to doing this stuff, other than as it's part of my story. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. But anybody can be affected. So that's
Yes.
the
Yes.
bottom line. Yeah. You are such a wonderful example of thriving. And I mean, again, going through what you went through and being a success and now being a contribution. And we agree, we're trying to make a difference in this, of course, around codependency and addiction, and also have fun, because I think that's part of something that is really missing. I mean, this can get so dark, and yet we love our lives too.
Yeah.
We have a lot of joy.
Yeah.
So we want to also spread the joy and the hope that you can have, you know, a beautiful, fun life as well.
It's been such a pleasure having
Oh.
you on and listening to you. And I love the perspective of, you know, recovery from all things
Yes.
by empowering people.
Yes.
I think that's really key to feel empowered, because I know for me, that's not how I felt when I came in.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
So really appreciate
Oh,
it. So good to have you on
thank you
today.
so much. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for
If
having
there's
me. I
anything
really
we
enjoyed
can
it.
do, you let us know.
Right.
And we
And
will
vice versa.
let
Yeah.
you know when we post this.
Okay.
All
Perfect.
right. Thank you, my friend. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right. We're leaving Crazy Town. We're out of here.